Hey there friends, as promised I have my video on the new 4473 form, filling out for a background check when you purchase a firearm. Several changes made to it. I'm actually not going to go over all the changes because I don't see that all of them are relevant to us. Some of them are kind of clerical type changes that are made in there, where others probably have a little bit more of an impact on us as a gun purchaser. Section A, question 1 refers to the manufacturer and importer. They added the portion that says privately made firearm in parentheses PMF. This section is in there in the event that a private build might be sold to or through an FFL. Look at it this way: if you are selling your firearm that you privately made to a federal firearms license dealer, they're mandated now to receive that and put their own serial number on that for future sale of that. In other words, they can receive it without a serial number on it, but they cannot transfer it to anybody else without first putting a serial number on it. And I think that there's a combination of the beginning and the end of their own FFL number, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever the addition that they want to put on there is going to be, in order for them to add a serial number. In other words, if you're wondering what serial number they would put, it's a combination of what their own FFL number is and then just a numerical number after that. So that's how they would do that. So keep in mind that if you are trying to sell that firearm to an FFL, even if you wanted to do a transfer utilizing the FFL is going to have an additional fee tied to that somehow, because they now are responsible and they are assuming the responsibility based on this new ruling that now they have to pay in order to get that serial number put on there. And they're not writing it with a magic marker either. So you are going to have some additional costs that are going to involve transfers in the future if it is a privately assembled or made firearm. Now, kind of a litmus test that I always like to put on any new rule, wording, or even laws out there. I try to perform a quick and simple test for me, and I'm going to share that with you. What I always do is I ask the question, will it stop crime? In this case, no, it will not stop crime. None of that has anything to do with crime, because anyone who is creating a personally created, manufactured, finished, however you want to call it, firearm for the sole purpose of committing a crime is not going to bother with any of this. They're also not going to go to an FFL to facilitate a transfer. They're also not going to sell that gun back to an FFL. They are simply, if they want to get rid of it, going to throw it in the ditch, throw it in the river, throw it in the lake, or they're going to sell it out of the trunk of their car to some other felon out there. So this provision and this change to this rule changes nothing in terms of crime. What it does do is create new criminals. So anyone who doesn't follow this process now will be considered felons and will be criminalized as a result of this. The next change is to Section B under Question 10, where it adds reside in city limits, yes or no. This one is pretty simple, but this one could preview what may be coming down with the way the Biden administration and the Democrats are trying to push laws with federal dollars down to the city and parish, county levels. What I mean by that is, in so many cases, and a perfect example is red flag gun laws, the federal government realizes that a true red flag gun law that illegally confiscates firearms, it violates several amendments, not just the Second Amendment. So they are thinking that the states can do that and violate the Constitution at the local level, because now it's not a federal law, so it's easy to do. By putting this in there, you're essentially giving something else in there that can be done wrong. What I mean by that is, I live in Lake Charles, Louisiana. There is a community just north of Lake Charles who has a Lake Charles address on their driver's license, but they are not technically in the Lake Charles city limits. In fact, if you ask anybody around here, they won't even mention that they live in Lake Charles. They will say Moss Bluff, because that's the community that they live in. And it's also outside the city limits. So if you had a law that was passed over here that was simply a new municipality type law, it's not going to apply to people that are in that area, because it's only going to be to the city limits of Lake Charles, not to Moss Bluff, even though their address shows Lake Charles. Now, why does that matter? Well, it's partially because the ATF in many cases are looking at ways to catch you. they want to have things that you've done wrong. In other words, the more things that they can add to a 4473 that you have to fill out, the more chances and the more opportunity that you're going to get something wrong, that you're going to answer it wrong. Because again, you've been answering it one way for so very long. That's not the only reason for this, but that is one of the reasons for that. It gives them another place where they can have a technicality that traps you up and makes you now falsifying a federal document. 21B states, do you intend to purchase or acquire any firearm listed on this form and any continuation, sheets, or ammunition? Remember, look here closely that they added ammunition. For sale of other disposition to any person described in questions 21C, blah, blah, blah. It's essentially adding ammunition to firearms, but also asking you if you intend to sell or give this firearm to any of the prohibited people that are prohibited from purchasing firearms based on this same 4473, the questions that come after this one. So they're throwing ammunition into that. That brings up a red flag to me because ammunition has never been a part of this before. And it tells me that they're trying to now criminalize something that should not be criminalized. I don't think anybody is going to willfully give or sell a firearm or ammunition to a criminal unless they in fact are already criminals, thereby which this form does not apply anyway. To use my litmus test, is this going to stop a crime? No, it's not going to stop any crime because, again, criminals don't use this process. So this is going to be completely sidestepped by any potential criminals out there, and the same goes for the next change that they made. The next one pretty much says, do you intend to sell or otherwise dispose of any firearms listed on this form? And kind of goes on to say, is it, in the commission of a felony or whatever? Well, again, is this going to stop any crime? No, because the criminals are not filling out this 4473. The people you need to be asking that question to don't care what your question is, and they don't care to give you an answer, and they're not going to obey any of your laws anyway. So this stops no crimes. And again, all that it does is create another spot where there can be attack on charge. And what I mean by that is if for some reason I did sell a gun to somebody and they ended up either committing a crime or they were a felon somehow and I just didn't know that, then this is a way for them to say, Paul, we have you on an official federal document stating that you were not going to sell this firearm in the commission of a felony or to a felon or a prohibited person, and you did. So now we're going to have to arrest you because you lied on this federal form. Now I want to move on to the very end of Section B here because this is pretty interesting. You essentially have this certification statement saying what you intend to do and blah, blah, blah. It's just a lot of small type print that you probably never read whenever you sign your 4473. If you'll notice, your signature and the date comes right below that. That's what you're going to sign and date. That's the last thing. Everything below that is what your FFL is going to use to fill out the rest of his paperwork regarding your sale or your purchase. The last sentence of the certification statement has been changed from, I further understand that the repetitive purchase of firearms for the purpose of resale for livelihood and profit without a federal firearms license is a violation of federal law, to, I further understand that the repetitive purchase of firearms for the purpose of resale to predominantly earn a profit without a federal firearms license is a violation of federal law. So they're changing this again to, instead of say a profit, to predominantly earn a profit. Now, I'm not sure how an attorney is going to parse that apart, but the reason why I wanted to bring this part up is because of a video that I put out just yesterday on this guy who was making several firearms purchases and then private sales. This is the portion of it that he has signed on his 4473 when he purchased those firearms, that he was essentially saying that he wasn't intending to turn a profit if he were to resell those items. And this is probably the wording that could get him in a pinch and probably why the ATF was following him. So check out my last video for that information. Now, if you go down a little bit further down in Section C, you're going to see the notice section of it. And this is where they are talking about this ignorant law that they passed this past year that the turncoat senators and congressmen on the rhino side of things allowed something like this to go through, prohibiting people who are under 21 years of age from legally purchasing a firearm like every other adult person would. It's simply another way to keep adults, a certain subset of adults, from purchasing firearms within a certain period of time. It's going to allow for a 10-day waiting period. Now, the federal government, we know how they operate. They operate slow, cumbersome. They can't do simple things like websites. You have 7th graders who can build a website better than most people in federal government who are building websites. Case in point was the Obamacare website that crashed and cost them billions of dollars, when I know people who could have built it for $5,000. So nevertheless, this is another one of those things where the government is essentially proving that even though things are automatic and we can automate things in the private sector with the snap of a finger and the flip of a wrist, these people can't do it. They need days now in order for electronic information to go from one point to the other. Even though those things happen in the blink of an eye, because there's a human tied to the end of that, they need days. So instead of having an automated process that would make things truly automated, they want to keep manual cogs and gears into this, meaning people, to essentially make the process as cumbersome and as stupefied as they possibly can. So that's why you have this type of process. Again, there is no reason why, if they can get an instant background check, which is what the I stands for in the NICS system, that they can't automate and make it just as instant for the same type of information, just coming from a totally different location. No reason why that's not equally automated. Will that change stop any crime? No, it's not going to stop any crime. We know that. If a young person under the age of 21 has a juvenile record, that is bad enough to prohibit them from purchasing a firearm, they should be in jail. I use the same process and the same methodology as I do for adults, because these are adults. If you're under 21 years old and you're older than 18 or 18 and older, you are still an adult. So the same rules apply. If you've done something to prohibit you from purchasing a firearm, you should be in jail as a result of it. If you are a free person, you should have full access to all of your constitutional rights, and there should be no delays for anything, and certainly no stoppages to be able to purchase that firearm. This is an unconstitutional thing, and it should not exist. Folks, the number one thing to remember here is that the ATF and the federal government has never changed anything to make it easier on anybody except themselves. Any change they make is going to make it harder on you, because it's simply another way to add additional teeth to where the taxpayer, you and I, are the ones that are going to have a tougher time maneuvering around these new convoluted roadblocks that they're throwing at us. It's intended to make their job easier and to give them more authority. Make no mistake about it. They have never put anything out there that strips them of any level of authority or that gives you any more freedom to operate in this country. It's always just the opposite, always against you and in their favor. So make no mistake, if you see any changes made, it will never benefit you.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America. He's so horrible.